Committee on Homeland Security Subcommittee on Oversight and Management Efficiency will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is to receive testimony on state and local perspectives regarding the impact of transferring Guantanamo Bay detainees to the Homeland. The Chair now recognizes himself for an opening statement. In January 2009, President Obama signed Executive Order 13492, which ordered the closure of the detention facilities at Guantanamo Bay Naval Base in Cuba. Over 7 years later, in February 2016, the administration submitted its plan to close the detention facility. Although the plan is devoid of specifics, the administration has made clear that it intends to identify a location within the United States to detain an unspecified number of Guantanamo prisoners. In a hearing before the House Foreign Affairs Committee last month, a senior Defense Department official touted the plan as representing the collective best judgment of the administration's top military and civilian leaders, and is the result of close collaboration across numerous federal agencies. And I just must break from the script and comment on that a little bit. The collective best judgment of the administration's top military and civilian leaders, and with all due respect, military leaders that serve in the administration are bound to agree with the commander-in-chief, right? The old saying is ours is to do and die, ours is not to question why. So their credibility in this regard, unfortunately, has to be questioned on those bases, if nothing else. And of course, the civilian leaders looking to curry favor with the administration are in the same position. We want to look at the solid, unbiased facts, not the opinions or the collective best judgment. Moving on. But it's time to set the record straight. The administration has failed to seek the very necessary input from state and local law enforcement on its plan. The reason is simple. Law enforcement professionals strongly oppose any plan that could endanger the citizens they're sworn to protect. Last month, the major county sheriff's association, which represents sheriff's offices from our nation's largest counties, wrote the president to express their opposition to the plan. I ask that this letter be included in the record, and without objection, it is so ordered. The letter states that detainees deemed too dangerous to release should not be brought to the Homeland, where they will pose a threat to the local communities we serve. Why would the administration ignore the advice of our state and local law enforcement professionals? Just because their advice doesn't fit the administration's political narrative doesn't mean their voice shouldn't be heard. The fact is, state and local law enforcement have numerous concerns with the implications of bringing the world's most dangerous terrorists to our homeland. Law enforcement officials have serious questions which the administration's plan either failed to consider or simply did not answer. For example, what if the base requires evacuation? What if detainees require transportation to medical facilities, and what additional resources are needed for such transfers? And I'll add, what about court facilities? I happened to visit Guantanamo Bay, where the taxpayers paid dearly for a very specific court facility that handled these very dangerous people in a classified setting. Where is that going to happen, and who's going to be paying for that yet again? The administration has argued that taxpayers could save tens of millions of dollars by transferring these terrorists to the Homeland. And I would say, which taxpayers? Right now, all of us pay for Guantanamo Bay, but if you move them state by state, facility by facility, it will be the taxpayers in those local locations that will bear the entire burden. But did they calculate the cost to states and local communities? Cash-strapped states and localities will face additional costs due to the heightened threat environment brought about by this decision, and taxpayers will foot the bill. This site likely would become a magnet for protest as well, further straining the resources of the locals. We also have legal questions, such as whether these terrorists could be eligible for certain forms of relief from removal, release from immigration detention, or constitutional rights. The Department of Justice believes that existing statutory safeguards are sufficient, and courts historically have ruled that detainees held under the laws of war who are brought to the U.S. are outside the reach of immigration laws. But make no mistake, their lawyers will test every avenue and slow justice even further. Another major concern is that the facility would become a terrorist target itself. Consider the propaganda value for ISIS if it successfully sprang a hardened Gitmo terrorist on American soil. Anyone who thinks that this is impossible is suffering from, as the 9/11 Commission puts it, a failure of imagination. With about 30% of released detainees having been confirmed or suspected of rejoining the fight, Gitmo detainees clearly remain dangerous and want to kill Americans. The facility also could become an attractive target for lone wolves, and other radical Islamist extremists may be inspired to perform jihad in the homeland. The American people do not want Gitmo terrorists detained in their communities, their neighborhoods, or down the street from their children's school. Fortunately, Congress passed legislation that prohibits transferring Gitmo detainees to the homeland, and the President signed it. However, it's still moving forward with its legacy. The President, that is, and the administration is still moving forward with his legacy-driven agenda, which includes closing Guantanamo Bay. And it is different. It is very different from the national security agenda that I think he should be focused on. Despite the will of the American people, he's moving forward this agenda. States and localities must prepare for the possibility that this administration will seek to detain these terrorists in our community, despite the will of the American people. Finally, I thank Governor Haley for appearing before the subcommittee today, leaving her great state and coming to Washington, D.C. As I stated earlier, receiving input from states and local communities regarding these transfers is critical. That Governor Haley made the trip to Washington today underscores that importance. Thank you again for being here today, Governor. I look forward to your testimony. The chair now recognizes the ranking minority member of the full committee, the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, for his statement.
Thank you, Chairman Perry, for holding today's hearing. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to request unanimous consent to introduce statements into the record from retired Major General Michael Leonard, who commanded the Joint Task Force that stood up the detention facilities at Guantanamo Bay, and James Goodles, Executive Director of the American Correctional Association.
Well, without objection, so ordered.
Thank you and welcome, Governor, to this subcommittee hearing. Following the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, the United States faced a question of what to do with so-called unlawful combatants captured in military operations in Afghanistan or other counterterrorism operations. The answer at the time that military leaders seized upon was a U.S. military prison located within the Guantanamo Bay naval base in Cuba. The first 20 detainees arrived at Guantanamo Bay prison on January 11, 2002. Since that time, Guantanamo Bay has served as a prison camp to detain dangerous individuals, to interrogate those individuals on suspected acts of terrorism, and to prosecute those individuals for war crimes. At its peak, there were nearly 800 individuals held at Guantanamo Bay. During the Bush administration, more than 500 were released to their home countries or transferred to a third country. This month, the Department of Defense announced that they would transfer 9 detainees to Saudi Arabia. The total number of individuals currently at Guantanamo Bay is 80. I want to make it clear that Guantanamo Bay has served its purpose and must be closed. Closing the Guantanamo Bay detention facility is a national security imperative. Its continued operations weakens our national security by furthering the recruitment propaganda of violent extremists, hindering relations with key allies and partners, and draining Department of Defense resources. In 2009, President Obama signed an executive order expressing these concerns and ordering the closing of the detention facilities. As part of the closure, it may be necessary for those detainees who cannot be transferred to a third-party country to be in prison in the United States in facilities deemed to be able to do so. Today, I expect to hear concerns of the national security implications for transferring suspected terrorists to the United States. Some of the witnesses may even say that bringing detainees to the United States bring terrorism to our own backyards. Based on years of research and analysis by the Department of Defense, State, and Homeland Security, these concerns simply are not supported. There is no evidence that suggests housing Guantanamo detainees will bring additional attacks, attention, or danger to the United States. In fact, America has a long track record of incarcerating dangerous terrorists. Some of the most dangerous terrorists in the world that we've known are incarcerated at U.S. maximum security prisons, such as the Supermax facility in Colorado. In fact, the man who tried to bring down the World Trade Center in 1993 and his co-conspirators have been serving multiple life sentences in Supermax since 1997. No one, terrorist or any criminal, has ever escaped from the Supermax prison. The only person charged in the 2012 terrorist attack on the U.S. compound in Benghazi is currently being held in Alexandria, Virginia, approximately 15 miles from where we are sitting now. In fiscal year 2015, the cost to operate Guantanamo Bay was approximately $445 million. In addition to these annual costs, maintaining the facility in the future would require an additional $200 million. Closing the facility is expected to save between $140 and $180 million annually. The plan President Obama delivered to Congress represents the best and most secure way to close the prison at Guantanamo Bay. Today, I encourage everyone to focus on the facts and not baseless fear. I look forward to your testimony and the testimony of all the witnesses and fact-based answers to my questions today. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Other members of the subcommittee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to have two panels of distinguished witnesses before us today. The chair will now recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Duncan, to introduce the first witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this incredibly important hearing today. It's a great day in Washington, just like it's a great day in South Carolina, because I'm honored and proud to introduce my good friend, Governor Nikki Haley. First elected governor in 2010 as the 116th governor of the great state of South Carolina. She is the first female and first minority governor in state history and is currently the youngest governor serving in the nation. Prior to becoming governor, we served together in the South Carolina General Assembly for 6 years, and she's been an ardent leader in South Carolina, bringing numerous jobs to the state and constantly furthering South Carolina's economic development. I appreciate her hard work as governor and her leadership in bringing our state through some very difficult times, especially in the last 12 months. She's also an alumni from my alma mater, Clemson University. We're both very proud of that. She has been a vocal opponent from the very beginning of the President's plan to move the Guantanamo Bay terrorists to the United States, specifically to the Naval Consolidated Brig in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm excited to have her testify before our subcommittee, providing a governor's perspective on this important issue. So welcome, Governor Haley, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. One point of administrative concern. The chair asks unanimous consent that the gentleman from New York, Mr. Katko, be allowed to sit on the dais and participate in this hearing. Without objection, so ordered. Chair thanks the gentleman, and thank you, Governor, for being here today. The witness's full written statement will appear in the record. The chair now recognizes Governor Haley for her testimony.
Thank you very much, and we invite all of you to South Carolina, where it's 80 degrees and sunny. So we hope that you will come and take the time to visit soon. Chairman Perry, Ranking Member Thompson, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to be here to speak on this issue of national importance. I especially want to thank Congressman Duncan and other members of the South Carolina delegation for their support on this issue. In August of last year, my office was contacted out of the blue by the Department of Defense to inform us that they were traveling to Charleston, South Carolina, to assess the U.S. Naval Consolidated Brig for the possibility of housing Guantanamo Bay detainees. Imagine my surprise. Not only was it against federal law to transfer Guantanamo detainees into the United States, but why would anyone want to put terrorists in Charleston? Charleston, the city we call the Holy City, the city named the #1 vacation spot in the country for 4 years in a row. In South Carolina, the state that was named the friendliest state in the country, the most patriotic state in the Union, it makes 0 sense. On February 23, 2016, President Obama announced his plan to close Guantanamo Bay Detention Facility, currently used to house some of the deadliest terrorists in history, including the principal architect of the September 11th attacks, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. This plan contained little new information. It did not even name a stateside facility for law of war detention, but instead referenced the Department of Defense's 2015 survey of 13 potential but unidentified facilities. In the opening paragraph of the plan, President Obama presents the 3 reasons for why it is a national security imperative that the United States end its mission in Guantanamo Bay. Regardless of any merit that may support these assertions, they do not support the conclusion that the terrorists should be transferred to Charleston, South Carolina, or any other location in the United States. I know that other witnesses today will discuss specific cost and security concerns, and so my testimony today will focus on 3 specific reasons provided by the President's plan. First, the President claims that Guantanamo Bay serves as propaganda and a recruitment tool for terrorists. Well, of course it does, but so do statements by public leaders, the United States stance against terrorism, and American values as a whole. And so too, certainly, would a similar facility located in Charleston, South Carolina, Leavenworth, Kansas, or Florence, Colorado. Terrorists have chosen to wage war on the United States based on ideological hatred towards the American way of life and the fundamental freedoms of which we pride ourselves. The September 11th attacks occurred before there was ever a Guantanamo Bay facility, as did the first World Trade Center bombing, the USS Cole bombing, and numerous other attacks or attempted attacks on United States interests around the world. Moving detention operations from a secure facility outside of the continental United States and into Charleston will not stop the propaganda. This line of thinking is giving the terrorists too much credit and too much validity. Terrorists do not need a jail to hate us. They hate us on their own. Second, the President contends that the presence of the facility at Guantanamo Bay is somehow a major impediment to our relationships with foreign nations. As a governor, my principal engagement outside of the United States is admittedly on the economic development front, attracting foreign investment to my state. That being said, assuming the President's assertions are true, the question that comes to my mind is what about detention activities at Guantanamo Bay is damaging to our relationships with foreign leaders and nations? Whether the terrorists are detained on an American military base in Cuba or somewhere in the United States, they will be held under the same legal authority by the same country, in the same manner, for the same duration, for the same reasons. Why does the zip code matter? As to the impact on foreign relations in South Carolina, I can tell you I am tremendously concerned. In the Charleston area alone, we have international manufacturing giants, Boeing, Mercedes-Benz, and now Volvo. We have one of the most important deepwater ports on the Atlantic coast. South Carolina is home to the largest BMW producing plant in the world. We have 5 international tire companies. We also have GE, Google, Bosch, DuPont. I could go on and on. How am I to tell these companies that they will be sharing an address with the most heinous and dangerous terrorists on earth? That the city that they chose to call home is now going to be one of the most high-profile terrorist targets in the world? The truth is, I can't, and I won't. Finally, the President wants to talk about cost. Let me first say, if there is one thing we can all agree, the federal government is absolutely responsible for, it is defending the people of the United States of America. And while the Department of Defense is not immune from fiscal waste, running a military prison to detain terrorists during an ongoing armed conflict should not be high on the list of cost-saving measures. I come from a state where we balance our budget. I promise we can help you find $85 million somewhere else to cut. But more than that, cost simply doesn't matter to me. You could pay the state of South Carolina to host these terrorists, and we wouldn't take them for any amount of money. There is no price worth the fear this reckless idea would strike in the hearts of the people of my state. There is no price worth the inevitable economic downturn it would cause. And there is no price worth watching terrorists across the globe celebrate victory and rightly claim that they can dictate the military posture of what should be the most powerful nation in the world. I'd like to close with this. As the members of this committee know better than most, national security decisions should be made with one and only one consideration in mind: what is in the best interests of the safety and security of the citizens of the United States. While serious policy issues with no easy answers underline the long-term detention and final disposition of terrorists captured during armed conflict, the location of a United States-controlled military prison should not be determined based on loose perception, estimates, and 8-year-old campaign pledges. Last summer, the people of Charleston stared hate directly in the eye. We know true hate, and we know what fear it can bring. We don't need to see it again, nor do we wish it on any other state. Keep the terrorists where they are, where they belong. Do not bring them to my home. I again thank you for the opportunity to speak here today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Governor Haley. The Chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes of questions. We've already spent a fair amount of time today discussing the security implications of bringing Guantanamo detainees to the homeland, and particularly to your state. In that vein, can you please just describe for the committee members some of the South Carolina-specific concerns that you and law enforcement agencies under your purview would have?
You know, the first thing as a governor I'll tell you is, what does it do to the reputation of the state where you take these detainees? So here in South Carolina, where we have worked massively on bringing Made in America jobs to South Carolina, what company is going to invest in a state where they keep these heinous terrorists? They're not going to. And the reason is companies look at where they're going to bring their suppliers, where they're going to bring their customers. They don't want that reputation on them as they go forward. Now you look at the tourism aspect of it. Who's going to come vacation in a state that is now known to house these terrorists? It completely taints what we have been proud to say is the #1 tourist vacation for 4 years in a row. But it would do this to any other state. All of these implications are very important. And we know we are already having to stand up all of our armed bases, all of our security, because the targets right now are on servicemen and women. You're just putting another target, but now you're going to put it on Charleston, South Carolina. It's wrong. To go and have states now have to deal with one more issue when we are dealing with so many is wrong. Our focus now is, how do we keep our servicemen and women safe? Because right now, if I sit down and talk to my FBI affiliates, as well as my chief of SLED, that's who we're trying to protect, because the targets are on military, any military people in uniform, any security in uniform. And then if you go and you put it in a place like South Carolina, we are not only going to have protests, but we'll also have threats that we don't have right now. Why would you move something there and cause stress on this country when right now this country is going through so many homegrown issues on its own, to turn around and add one more to it?
So just kind of following up on that a little bit, just to set the context, of course, the detention facility in Guantanamo Bay is sequestered from, there's not going to be any protests, right? I mean, nobody's flying to Guantanamo Bay for recreating or whatever, and then would be protesters at some point. And of course, you're not going to go there kind of unannounced and exercise some terrorist activity. That's just not going to happen at Guantanamo Bay. So it's shielded from that by the virtue of its geography and the kind of place that it is. And also, I just wanted to say, since you mentioned the military, and of course you have a high component of military service members in the state and in the area, thank you for you served with your husband as well. We appreciate the country, appreciates your sacrifice in that regard. Can you talk at all about the costs to local law enforcement, whether it's regarding protests, whether it's regarding being prepared for any eventuality, and to not have that failure of imagination where either one of these individuals would get out or someone would use the facility as a target or try and get somebody out? Can you address that at all?
You know, we can talk about costs, but you can't put a cost on fear. You can't put a cost on what it will do to a state. We looked at hate in the eye last year. We had to deal with that. Our state is still recovering from that. It is unbelievable what it will do to the people of a state when they know hate is anywhere near them. There is no cost you can put on that. What I can tell you is we have had to stand up our armed bases. We have already had to add additional securities to our military, to our officials in everything and anything we do, because every state in the country now has to be more careful. But really, cost to me is such a frivolous conversation in this whole piece of what it will do, because when you've been a state that knows what this is like, you never want to go back to that, and no state should ever have to know what that fear feels like.
Have the local law enforcement agencies, in collaboration with federal enforcement agencies, done any cost estimates that you know of? I mean, I don't know. Like I said, it is very difficult to quantify, but at some point, it's going to require additional, whether it's additional training, whether it's additional manpower, additional equipment, briefings, protocols. I mean, have you even begun? I mean, based on the phone call that you said you got, have you even started down that road, and have local law enforcement officials aware of this, expressed any concern to you?
We've talked to our directors, whether it be that of SLED, whether it be of DPS, whether it be of our military bases and the Adjutant General. Those are conversations we'll have. I'm prepared to spend whatever it takes to protect my people. But what I will tell you again is this is something that on every level, whether it be law enforcement, whether it be military, whether it be tourism, whether it be economic development, every call that I've gotten has been, please don't let this happen to South Carolina.
Thank you, Governor. My time's expired. The chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Thompson, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much. Again, Governor, thank you for appearing before the committee this morning. I'll get to my question. Have you had any dealings with the proposed facility that they're talking about potentially transferring the prisoners to?
The Department of Defense has had no interactions with us whatsoever outside of suddenly getting a call saying that they were going to be going to the Charleston Navy Brig. That's all that we've gotten. They have not had any communication with us or told us what to expect or anything else to that effect.
To your knowledge, are you, as governor, spending any money from the taxpayer standpoint in the maintenance and operation of that naval facility?
Right now, not any additional money is being spent on that facility outside of we are trying to plan on economic development issues within that area, but that has all stopped now that they've decided to come in. It would be extremely helpful if the Department of Defense would engage with us and let us know what they're doing.
Yeah, I agree. Phone call would not be enough, but if they demonstrated that they would pick up the cost of whatever's involved, is that a concern of yours, or are there some other concern?
They could tell me that they would pay South Carolina to house these terrorists, and I would not take them. The state of South Carolina does not want them. There is no amount of money that they can pay, whether it be cost or supplement, that would justify those detainees coming to South Carolina.
I appreciate your opinion. You referenced what happened in Charleston relative to the unfortunate circumstances at Mother Emanuel.
Yes.
Some of us also participated in funeral services and other things, and it was not a good day. And that's the other ugly head of terrorism called domestic terrorism.
That's right.
And I compliment you and the local law enforcement for how you've addressed it.
Thank you.
Can you just, for the record, tell me who has custody of the young man charged with killing the people at Mother Emanuel?
He is in South Carolina.
Is he in a federal facility, or state or county facility?
I believe he's in a state facility.
Do you know where? Is he in Charleston? If he in Sumter, or where?
He's in Charleston.
So the fellow who did that heinous crime is in Charleston right now.
Yes.
And has that posed any kind of security issues, to your knowledge, for the people of Charleston?
We won't let it pose any security issues. Right now, what I can tell you is it's a constant reminder. It's a constant reminder of what happened, what we have to deal with, as we have to know that he's there. No one wants him there. And right now, they're in the process of going forward with the death penalty.
Well, and there's no issue on my part to pursue the death penalty at all.
Right.
But the fact is, sometimes we have difficult jobs to do that include dealing with bad people. And as governor, you and local officials are dealing with this bad person. And whatever is required to make sure that that bad person is kept in a facility where he can't harm anyone, to the extent that he's prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Your oath of office and other things would allow you to expend whatever resources to guarantee the safety of the people in South Carolina. And that's the point I'm trying to get at.
Yes, sir, and I appreciate your point, Mr. Thompson. And, you know, our goal is that we will deal with him as we need to deal with him. That was a homegrown issue that we will, you know, absolutely deal with. We just don't want 80 more coming to Charleston. Dealing with one has shaken the state enough. I can't imagine what we would have to do if we had to deal with 80 of them.
Thank you very much.
Thank
I
you.
yield back.
Chairman thanks the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman, Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Governor Haley, I apologize that the ranking member had to bring a discussion about a deranged murderer into a discussion about Guantanamo Bay terrorists that are backed by global organizations known as Al-Qaeda, ISIS, ISIL, whichever term we want to use, Boko Haram, Abu Sayyaf, and the list goes on, of organizations that are global terrorist organizations that have a completely different mindset than individuals that are deranged and commit heinous crimes in this country. For the record, Mr. Chairman, the governor sent a letter to Secretary of Defense Ash Carter along with Governor Brownback on August 25th, and there was also an executive order July 16th, 2015 by Governor Haley after the Chattanooga terrorist attack. I would like to submit that for the record, please.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Governor Haley, my understanding is there's a school in fairly close proximity to the Charleston Naval Brig Elementary School or middle school. Is that correct?
Yes, and I actually spoke with the representative from that area, and he called me yesterday and said, good luck tomorrow. He said, everybody in my area is terrified of what could happen.
Right. So we're talking about South Carolinian mothers and fathers that are considering sending their children to a school in close proximity to some of the most wanted and dangerous terrorists in the world. So thanks for pointing that out. The letter that you and Governor Brownback sent to Ash Carter, did y'all get a response on that?
I'm not aware that we got a response.
No response
I
on
will
that?
follow up and just confirm that, but I'm not aware of a response. They've been very, they've handled this very much on their own and have not included us in the process. I have had conversations with Governor Brownback, and I have made it very clear, and I want it to be made very clear, any governor in the country that has to deal with this, I will fight for them to make sure this doesn't happen in their state either. This is not just about South Carolina. This is about every state in the country.
So just to be clear, it doesn't sound like the administration's having any dialogue with governors across the country that are considered, their states are considered for the Guantanamo Bay terrorists.
No, sir, and what we know is that already we have had to sit there and wonder what's going to happen. But again, the fear that it is put in every state up for who we think is up for consideration, the fear that every state has is what's going to happen, when's it going to happen, what's the turnaround time, and we don't have any answers for them.
Wow. It's interesting because the administration talks about stakeholder involvement, public input. In fact, They just denied the offshore areas off the coast of South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, and Virginia in the next 5-year drilling plan for energy development so that our states can play a part in the energy renaissance and energy security. And they touted the fact that they talked to stakeholders when 78% of South Carolinians that were polled wanted to see our areas opened up. The stakeholders they talked to were a very, very small group of environmentalists. But here we've got the administration wanting to fulfill a campaign promise and bring terrorists. These aren't just criminals. These are terrorists backed by the organizations I mentioned earlier to the U.S. soil illegally in violation of the NDAA, by the way, which is a bilateral NDAA that goes back multiple Congresses that have said the same thing. In violation of that, bring these terrorists to U.S. soil, to South Carolina, Kansas, or maybe another state without any correspondence with the governor. The governor represents 4.8 million people in South Carolina. The General Assembly, 124 in the House, 46 in the Senate, represent a combined total of 4.8 million people in South Carolina. The congressional delegation, 7 of us, represent 4.8 million people in South Carolina who overwhelmingly support your decision to stop or try to stop the administration bringing terrorists to Charleston, South Carolina. So he'll listen to a small group of environmentalists about energy issues, but he won't listen to the governor, the General Assembly, and the congressional delegation with regard to bringing terrorists to U.S. soil? That is alarming to me. So let me ask you this. Has there been any sort of threat assessment with regard to the naval brig transferring the terrorists? I believe right now terrorists on an island, isolated from the mainland, very difficult to get to, very difficult for the terrorist organizations that are supporting these terrorists to free them, attack the island, or whatnot. They're guarded by United States Marines, by the way. Has there been a threat assessment about that brig in Charleston and whether that is a possible target and how that would be handled that you're aware of?
So again, we have not been given any information by the Department of Defense. What I can tell you is I look at this very much like I look at my correctional facilities. You never know what's going to happen. So if one has a medical emergency, you all of a sudden have to figure out, okay, where are they going to go? Which hospital is going to be there? How are we going to secure them from one point to the other? How are we going to handle everything they have to do in the process? If anything happens and there's some sort of breakout, or if they shut down the prisons, or if they take over the prisons, which that can happen, those are all things that we have to deal with now. But we're dealing with those in South Carolina. Never have we thought about or can we comprehend dealing with terrorists that have done the crimes that they've done?
Well, thank you for your valuable leadership on this. I'd be interested to see what other congressmen would say and what their governors would say if their state was targeted for these terrorists. Thank you for your leadership and for being here today. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair, thanks the gentleman.
And I would just, if I could add one point, I would dare to say any governor, Republican or Democrat, would not want these detainees in their state.
Chair, thanks the gentleman from South Carolina. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Richmond.
Let me just start off by saying that I know that Mr. Duncan apologized on behalf of the ranking member. You know, I don't think the ranking member needs anybody to apologize for him, but if you want to apologize, that's fine. But I'm sure he can speak for himself. And the issue of bringing up Mother Emanuel and the fact that a terrorist is an issue that we've been raising on this side for a very long time. It doesn't matter the nationality of the perpetrator. It doesn't matter their motivation. Terrorism is terrorism no matter the perpetrator or the victim. So when we look at those 9 people that were killed, we call it domestic terrorism. And the fact that you can hold a domestic terrorist means you have the ability to safely house a very dangerous person who others would want to do harm to. So you would agree that you at least have the ability to do it?
I will never question our military and our officers. We are totally capable, and I don't doubt them for a second that they are not able to do their job and able to do their job well. I am talking about the environment you bring upon a state when you create that kind of fear. You send a chill factor into a state that you can't put a cost on, that you can't put a reason on, that you can't give an explanation for. I know we have the best military in the world. My military will do whatever they have to do to protect the people of South Carolina. My officers will do whatever they have to protect the people of South Carolina. That's not the issue. That will never be the issue. The issue is, why do you want to bring these detainees that have done these types of terrorist acts onto American soil when you don't have to? You don't have to. I'm an elected official. I had campaign promises. I know what that's about. You want to fulfill every one. It's in your heart, it's in your soul that you want to fulfill it. And I believe that President Obama had his intentions back in 2009 when he was going against Mrs. Clinton, that he had a reason for saying that. These are different times. We are seeing different types of terrorism. We are seeing a different level of terrorism. It is time to rethink this and understand that those people that are doing those types of acts that we send to Guantanamo, we're sending them there for a reason. We're keeping them there for a reason.
Well, let me ask you a question. In 2002, suspected terrorist Yasser Hamid was transferred to Naval Brig in Norfolk, Virginia, and then to a Naval Brig in Charleston, South Carolina, the same location being looked at today for some of the transfers. Did his presence cause concern? Did you even know he was there? I don't think you were governor then, but did it create an uproar when we transferred him there?
I know that he was there, but the concern is you're not talking about one. And not only that, this is a different day and time than it was back then. You're now looking at a time where we've seen tremendous amounts of terrorist attacks. You're looking at a time where you're now wanting to bring a different level of terrorists to South Carolina. So I don't think you can compare that one detainee that we happened to have at that time compared to the others. It's totally different.
Just because of the size of the number?
Because if you go and you bring these detainees here, now the way that the element comes to the area, it will encourage more people to want to go and be in South Carolina, whether to protest, whether to join forces, whether to create homegrown terrorism, all of those things that governors are now trying to protect from as it is. You're creating a whole new magnet for that when you do something like this. That's the concern. I get SLED reports, my state law enforcement division. The SLED reports we get are now watching all of the homegrown terrorists that we think we may be getting that are being trained overseas and then are coming back wanting to do something. If you go and you put these detainees in South Carolina, you've just created a magnet. So that propaganda that you claim is in Guantanamo Bay, you're going to just move that propaganda to Charleston, South Carolina.
Well, let me just say, and look, I'm from New Orleans, tourist area, very similar to Charleston, both founded because of the slave trade. So I understand tourism being a base, but I guess my ultimate question is, this is just a classic example of, I guess, all the American territories and states saying, not in my backyard. Let's leave them in Cuba because we don't have a responsibility over there and we don't care about how, the ramifications over there. So if everybody says not in my backyard, which is basically the argument that I hear, is we just don't want the chaos associated with housing these bad guys.
So that would imply that all the governors are wrong?
I'm just asking if that's the argument, not in my backyard.
I think all the governors know what this means when it's in their backyard. So this is not me saying, oh, put it in North Carolina, or put it in Kansas, or put it in Colorado. I don't want it going into any state in the country. This is not my backyard. This is the United States of America. This is an area that we are trying to keep safe, and to bring terrorists from a place where they cannot harm anyone to an area that has populations within their states that they can harm, and God forbid one error happen, one. None of us wants that on us, none of us. We can't afford that, and for what? Why are we having this conversation? What is the urgency to move these detainees? I've yet to hear what the logical reasoning is. The propaganda is not true, because they hate us, because the terrorists will always hate America. They hate our freedoms. They hate what we stand for. They hate that we're against terrorism. So for the tax money, D.C. has never been that stickler on cutting tax dollars. I think we could help you save some money so that you can keep Guantanamo Bay open. When you talk about the other things that this will do, I just don't get it. And neither do any of the governors across this country understand what the urgency is to move terrorists that are in a place where we know they can't touch Americans. Why do we want to put them on American soil? Because now we not only know if they come to American soil, what sort of rights are they now going to have? We've watched the Supreme Court totally start to go down that slippery slope. We've dealt with the habeas corpus issues. We've dealt with all of that. So now what rights are we going to say that they're going to have because they are now on U.S. soil? No one has yet been able to answer that question. And every governor in the country wants to know what rights these terrorists are going to have and what we're going to have to deal with on that front. We deserve answers as governors. We deserve answers to what you are trying to do to our states, and the fact that no one in the federal government will give us those answers is an unfair assumption and an unfair thought to not allow the people of this country to speak up, because no one wants Guantanamo Bay in the United States.
Mr. Chairman, I see my time has expired.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good morning.
And let me begin by saying I want to associate myself with your earlier testimony about this being an ill-conceived plan, and that I just think it's absolutely ludicrous to think that moving these prisoners to American soil could somehow improve our national security. I just don't get it. I don't understand it at all. And I can tell you, I think this is just, again, an ill-conceived plan to try to keep a campaign promise, which makes it even worse. Governor, my question is this. I have the honor and the privilege of representing coastal Georgia, of Savannah. You mentioned in your opening testimony that Charleston was the second most favorable vacation spot behind Savannah, and that Georgia was the second, or Georgia was the friendliest state. I wanted to make sure we got that clear, but nevertheless, tourism is extremely important in Charleston, extremely important in Savannah. I know it's impossible to put an economic cost, to put a number on that, but can you imagine? Can you just elaborate on the impact that might have on tourism? What, the driving force in our economy in Savannah and Charleston and in New Orleans?
Well, first of all, send greetings to my sister state and to Governor Deal as well. I will tell you that the cost associated, who's going to take their family? Who's going to take their kids? Because if you go to where the naval brig is, that's where a lot of the tourist issues are. You know, if you want to go down the market, if you want to go to look at the houses, if you want to go to all those areas, you just, as a mom, you don't take your children anywhere near where you think there could be a threat. It's the perceived idea that they don't know. So, number one, tourism and conventions and all of those things would stop going to that state, and that's a big part of it. Secondly, you would stop having the element of TV shows. We now have Top Chef that's coming to South Carolina. Those types of questions are things that they ask because they don't want to be in a state that has any negativity to it. Then you look at the fact that even with the economic development projects that we have done in South Carolina, I don't even know how I would begin to talk to a CEO about something like that. I don't know how I could do that, because what people don't realize, it's not just getting a plant and having them manufacture or do work. They want a place where they can host their suppliers and their customers and their executives to that area. What are you going to do to Charleston when you do that?
Sure, and last time I checked, it was my impression that the role of the federal government was to assist you and to help the states and to help the local governments and increasing
Protect the citizens.
Absolutely. And on that point, let me say this. You know, I've always said that the number one responsibility of the federal government is to protect our people and our homeland. And I for the life of me, I can't understand how this is going to do anything except the exact opposite. But on the point of the federal government and their role, it seems to me like this is going to, obviously, I'm a former mayor and a former state legislator, and it's obvious that this is going to push more cost and more responsibility down to the states and down to the local communities. How are you going to deal with that?
It's one more thing that we'll have to deal with. So not only is it going to be security, and it's going to be military, it's going to be planning of medical services, it's going to be planning for should something go wrong, it's going to have to create routes and things that we have to have in place. Governors have so much pressure now just in dealing with all the issues, whether it's tracking the terrorism in our state, whether it's tracking corrections and prisoners and making sure they stay in their place. This is a whole nother level of threat that we would have to start doing. So trying to track the costs of this, I don't know what it is, but again, even if it was zero, even if they agreed to pay us, cost is not an issue on this. This goes far beyond cost.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And you know, to the point about, and you've brought it up a number of times during this testimony about protesters and about the propaganda portion of it. Obviously, in today, you know, we're an immediate newscast. I mean, this is being tweeted right now, I can assure you. So the propaganda is a concern. It's got to be a concern of all of us, and certainly I know it's got to be a concern of you as a governor.
I don't disagree with President Obama about the propaganda of Guantanamo.
Sure.
I think wherever you move the location, you are creating that same propaganda. It doesn't change anything.
Not at all. Well, again, let me thank you for addressing this and for making the point succinctly that you have, that it doesn't matter what state this is. It doesn't matter what city this is. We don't need this on our homeland. The number one responsibility of the federal government is to protect our homeland, not to bring these people over here. Don't we understand that that's what the people are saying? No, we don't want them over here.
I will stand side by side with any governor that has to deal with this.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you for your testimony.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Loudermilk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and
Morning.
thank you, Governor,
Thank
for being here. Just as a side note, all of my family is from Walhalla, South Carolina. So there you go.
We will take good care of them.
All right. Could you answer, in your opinion, why are we currently keeping the detainees at Guantanamo Bay instead of originally just bringing them to the U.S.?
I mean, I think if you look at what the thought process was, anyone that was involved in a terrorist act or anyone that could possibly, that was in war, that could possibly do something of a terrorist attack, we put them there for a reason, and that was to keep the people of the United States safe.
Because they are threats to
Because they are absolutely threats to the American people.
So the idea was to keep them off of U.S. soil in the case of escape or any other action. In fact, speaking of escapes, they do happen. In 2010, we had 2,500 escapes in the United States. In 2011, 3,100. In 2012, 2,500. And in 2014, over 2,000. So escape is something that we must be concerned about.
It's something that we deal with in South Carolina, and every governor deals with across this country.
And Mr. Richmond brought up, or I'm sorry, the ranking member brought up the case of the shooting in South Carolina. That was an American citizen who was under your legal jurisdiction, correct?
That is correct.
So we would be adding more perpetrators into your state that aren't necessarily under your jurisdictional boundary.
That's exactly right.
Increasing the threats, of which we already have threats in this nation. There's another aspect of this is Charleston or South Carolina ever susceptible to natural disasters,
Yes, of course.
such as hurricanes?
Yes.
Has the administration addressed at all an evacuation plan or the security risks should you have to evacuate a detention facility in the case of a hurricane?
Well, we would have to do that. If that happened, we would have to certainly figure out how we were going to do that. And that, again, creates not only more security, but where do you go? What do you do with a terrorist like that?
Yeah. And of course, that would have an impact on you, not only the cost to the state, but taking resources away that should be there helping citizens of South Carolina to escape the disaster.
The problem is, what answer do I give to the people of South Carolina? Because those are the questions they're going to have, and no answer I can give them is ever going to be good enough.
There's one other area that this brings a threat that I haven't heard many talk about, and that is the threat of additional terrorist attacks because you were housing known terrorists. If you recall the Garland, Texas terrorist attack, that was because there was an art competition that they felt was offensive to Muslims. So there was an attack in Garland, Texas. Would you anticipate that ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Hezbollah, we can go down the list of those that threaten the United States and our security, our safety, our people, would that not increase the risk of soft target attacks in South Carolina because you were housing known terrorists?
And I think I was respectfully trying to tell the ranking member and Mr. Richmond exactly why that's a concern is because if it's there, I'm already dealing with FBI and SLED on issues that we know we may have in South Carolina, and watching people who may want to do things in relation to all of those terrorist groups. If we housed anything in a state, that's going to be more of a reason for them to want to go to that area, to do something in that area to help get that person out or to make a statement.
Do you know if any detainee has ever escaped from Guantanamo Bay?
Not that I'm aware of.
Do you know if any detainee or there has ever been a attempted terrorist attack against a U.S. military facility at Guantanamo Bay?
Not that I'm aware of.
What would your assessment be if there was an escape in Guantanamo Bay? Would that person be a direct threat to citizens of the United States other than our U.S. military there?
It's the whole reason they're there, so that they're not, is to protect the rights, the freedoms, and the lives of the United States citizens.
So Guantanamo Bay is working.
It's working, and it has been working, and while we're having this conversation, it just baffles me.
There are certain things that this government and this administration does that baffles a whole lot of people of the United States. But being baffled and being threatened, your life, your liberty, your security, and your family is a totally different aspect. And that's what I cannot understand, why we want to change something that is working and put your state at risk. I see I'm out of time, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Governor.
Thank you.
Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Katko.
Thank you, Governor. It's
Good
a
morning.
pleasure to have you here today. I, too, have family. I'm from Syracuse, New York, not New York City. Syracuse, upstate New York, and I too, have family in Charleston. So,
Oh, great. Thank
been there
you.
many times to Wild Dunes and also to Kiowa, and it's just an outstanding
Beautiful.
place.
Beautiful
And,
areas. Thank you. Visit often.
It's a great place. But I'm going to talk to you about a couple of things. I want to kind of get a feel from you, if I may, is to what degree has the administration consulted with you or worked with you while evaluating the suitability of Charleston for a site for their, possibly a site for these detainees? So in 2015, they did a survey. And did they work closely with you? Did they work with you at all on that?
Everything that they've done on their own. The only thing they did was call us and let us know they would be visiting Charleston, which was the first we heard of, to go look at the naval brig.
Are you telling me here that they made no effort to try and get input from you about this possible transfer of detainees?
No, and so what that's done to not only me, but every other governor that's possibly looking at this, it's left us without any information to share with our constituents or any way to defend ourselves against the possibility of these detainees coming to our state.
And it's just so I'm clear, so they never spoke to you at all about the potential economic costs of bringing them to Charleston?
They did not.
They talked to you at all about the possible security concerns that may emanate from bringing these detainees to Charleston?
They did not.
Did they talk to you at all or consult you at all, give you any heads up or any input at all regarding the potential for Charleston becoming a target if the detainees are put there?
They have not given us any information to provide any comfort whatsoever.
Well, that seems particularly outrageous, given the fact that there's a wealth of information about this. I mean, I'm on the Homeland Security Committee as a whole, and I've done a lot of work with respect to ISIS, and one thing's for sure is that, like you said earlier, there's a totally different threat dynamic now than there was even 10 years ago in this country. ISIS and affiliated groups are radicalizing Americans over the internet to do violence at home without ever leaving.
Exactly.
And when they can use something like this to foment that violence, they most likely will. And I'm shocked that they wouldn't even at least talk to you or share any input with you about that.
No, and we would welcome them talking to us because we would understand at least where we are in this situation and why they would consider the naval brig, or even if we're still up for consideration, we have gotten no input whatsoever.
That seems particularly outrageous to me. Now, just switching gears briefly, isn't it true that this is a medium security facility, the naval brig?
Yes.
Okay, so it's not even a max facility.
We would obviously have to do some things to it, and I guess maybe the Department of Defense has figured out how to do that, but they have not shared that.
So I was a federal prosecutor for 20 years, an organized crime prosecutor, prosecuting cartel-level drug traffickers, and I can tell you there's a slew of individuals that I prosecuted that are in maximum facilities for much less egregious crimes than what these individuals have committed against the United States. And it's shocking to me that we have different grades in the federal system, medium, max, super max. And to think about bringing perhaps the most dangerous individuals in the world to a medium security facility and then spend the extra money to upgrade that facility is perplexing at least, to say the least.
I agree.
Now, have you ever considered, have you consulted with anyone about possibly taking legal action to stop this from happening, given the fact that it's illegal currently under the law for the United States to expend any money to transfer individuals from Guantanamo Bay to the United States?
Well, Governor Brownback and I both sent letters because at the time the word was that it was Kansas and South Carolina were the two states that were being strongly considered. So we sent a letter to Secretary Carter to let him know that we absolutely didn't want to have this happen. But again, we have not heard of anything. Should we hear something, I will absolutely fight. I will absolutely sue. I will absolutely do whatever we need to do to protect our state. And like I said, Republican or Democrat, I will stand with any governor that has to go through this because I know the fear that it can put in the minds of the people of their state, but I also know the security concerns that that governor would have.
And lastly, it's true, is it not, that the vast majority, if not all of these detainees are most likely facing a military tribunal, if any at all?
I think so, yes.
And isn't it true that Guantanamo Bay is a military facility?
Yes, it is.
So what are we doing?
I don't know, and if you ever find out or talk to the Department of Defense, please do. We would love that information.
I'm not sure we'll get an answer, but thank you very much, and I
Thank you.
appreciate
Will the
your
gentleman
time.
yield the remaining time?
I will.
In response to the governor's question about a legal case, I filed a bill that gives the House of Representatives standing in court if the president does violate the NDAA law and brings Guantanamo Bay terrorists to U.S. soil. The bill that I filed, H.R. 617, would give Paul Ryan and the House of Representatives standing to stop this through the legal means. I'd ask the gentleman to sign on. Thank you for your time. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair also thanks Governor Haley for her valuable testimony and the members for their questions. First panel, Governor, you're excused.
Thank you.
The clerk will prepare the witnesses table for the second panel. Thank you. All right, everybody, thank you very much. We'll reconvene. The chair asks unanimous consent that the gentlelady from Kansas, Ms. Jenkins, be allowed to sit on the dais and participate in this hearing. Without objection, so ordered. Chair will now introduce our witnesses for the second panel. It'll be a little out of order for administrative purposes here. We'll start with Sheriff Michael Bouchard. Is that correct? Is Sheriff of Oakland County, Michigan, where he leads one of the nation's largest sheriff's offices overseeing 1,300 employees and managing an annual budget of over $140 million. Sheriff Bouchard is testifying on behalf of the Major County Sheriff's Association. The association is a professional law enforcement association of elected sheriffs representing counties or parishes with a population of 500,000 or more. Its membership represents over 100 million Americans. Mr. Ken Good is a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. He has served in numerous roles at the center since its founding in 2003. Previously, Mr. Good was a policy analyst at the Center for National Security Studies. At this point, the chair yields to the gentlelady from Kansas, Ms. Jenkins, to introduce our second witness on this panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me this great opportunity to introduce Mr. Thompson, the Leavenworth County Attorney in the 2nd Congressional District of the great state of Kansas. Mr. Thompson is a Kansan in every sense of the word. He is a Leavenworth native, and his family dates back 150 years in Leavenworth. He graduated from the University of Kansas and went on to graduate from Washburn University School of Law, both phenomenal universities in the 2nd District. His knowledge of the impact that a detainee transfer may have on Leavenworth and the entire region stems from his time as the top law enforcement official in Leavenworth County, and it will provide much needed context and insight into this process. I thank him for taking his time to come to Washington and sit before the subcommittee to answer questions. I have full faith and in his ability, and he will help Congress and the President, I think, better understand the implications and the repercussions of such a transfer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Chair, thanks to the gentlelady from Kansas, Ms. Jenkins, and thank you all for being here today. The chair recognizes Sheriff Bouchard for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Thompson, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I'm, as mentioned, Michael Bouchard. I'm Sheriff of Oakland County. Been in law enforcement for almost 30 years and run one of the largest sheriff's offices in America. As Vice President in charge of Government Affairs for Major County Sheriffs of America, I'm here to testify on their behalf. Far too often, local law enforcement's not consulted ahead of policy decisions that have direct consequence and implications for our communities. And despite years of conversation about closing Gitmo, transferring detainees, at no single point has the administration requested our perspective on this topic. As constitutionally elected officials, MCSA is adamantly opposed to any effort to close Gitmo and transfer detainees to U.S. soil. The nature of violence in America and around the world has evolved, and the expansion of encryption, social media for mass propaganda, inspiration for lone wolf attacks, and selective recruitment has exponentially grown. Securing the homeland cannot be an afterthought. Law enforcement regularly and proactively plans and practices for the unthinkable. After the attacks in Mumbai, I contacted all of the chiefs in my AOR and called on us to train together on a regular basis for just such a scenario. A detainee housed in the backyard of an ISIS sympathizer would be a powerful inspiration for a lone wolf attacker and further recruitment. We know ISIS has gone so far as to suggest targets, even in my county, where they published a suggested kill list with home addresses. Clearly, a community that houses prisoners from Gitmo could easily be added to such a list. Prison radicalization and recruitment is ongoing and a big concern. The same context that's applied to federal prisoners must be applied to Gitmo detainees, no matter if they are housed in a military facility or not. Going back as far as 2003, BOP Director Harley Lappin testified before the Senate that we know inmates are particularly vulnerable to recruitment by terrorists. The September 2015 former detainee summary report issued by the ODNI reported that 30% of former Gitmo prisoners are confirmed or suspected of being back in terrorism. Additionally, just a few months ago, Spanish and Moroccan authorities arrested 4 suspected ISIS affiliates, including one described Gitmo detainee. With high recidivism and the proclivity for extreme violence, releasing or transferring any additional detainees is simply counterintuitive. Even in the increased threat environment, law enforcement has continually been asked to do more with less. Local law enforcement does not have the necessary funds, and most recently, the life-saving equipment to properly address national security implications associated with transferring detainees to the U.S. Grant programs such as UASI work to address those gaps with local agency capabilities. However, over the years, we have seen a steady decline in those funding, and most recently, President Obama's FY17 budget cut UASI by 45%. The LASO military surplus program and federal grant programs are great examples of federal partnership with local communities. However, through executive action, not legislation, this administration recalled 1033 military surplus equipment and placed burdensome rules on others. On the very same day San Bernardino terror attacked our nation, in one of the worst attacks since 9/11, my office received an order that returned an armored personnel carrier to the federal government to be destroyed. The police in San Bernardino called the terrorists, "They came prepared today." On that day, America became less prepared because of that executive order. Gitmo houses detainees in U.S. facilities would present an extraordinary burden on the local community. Sheriff McMahon, a friend of mine in San Bernardino, has already incurred a $350,000 overtime bill from that one event and a $19 million expenditure. When emergencies arise, federal officials and military are not the first responders. It's the locals. Local must practice, prepare, train, and equip to deal with any situation, and bringing people here will necessitate that expenditure. That means significant investment, planning, training, and equipment. And all of these unreimbursed costs have been ignored in this so-called saving effort. Protest against, around, or at those facilities outside of the wire would be a local responsibility and cost, as would an escape. We have always sought to be a positive source of ideas and collaboration, and we applaud the committee's interest in hearing our thoughts. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the time, and I would be happy to answer questions.
Chair thanks, gentlemen. The chair recognizes Mr. Good for an opening statement. Correction. No, we'll go ahead with that. It's on the script here. We'll go with that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I understand that, and I know that you are an Iraq War veteran and a General Officer of Reserves. I want to thank you for your service. And Mr. Richmond and Mr. Duncan, I appreciate you being here for this hearing today. I think it's an incredibly important hearing that we spend time talking about the facts associated with the implications of bringing Guantanamo detainees into the United States. And first, I want to say that I do agree with President Obama that closing Guantanamo, it would advance the national security interests of the United States. And that is not just an opinion that President Obama came up with in his campaign. It was a broadly shared view from senior government officials, national security officials of both parties in 2007, 2008, and 2009. George W. Bush, in his memoir, wrote about the necessity of closing Guantanamo. Then presidential candidate John McCain, his plan to close Guantanamo would have moved all of the detainees to Fort Leavenworth in 2009. A host of other very high-ranking former officials agree with the necessity for closing Guantanamo. Colin Powell reiterated just this year that how necessary it was. And so I want to go off script a bit, as you, Mr. Chairman, did in your remarks, and express my sincere disappointment that you would so casually impugn the integrity of our military officers and the men and women serving in the Pentagon, that they would be presenting what is not their full judgment to this administration, that it is in the national security interests of the United States to close Guantanamo. I think you owe them an apology, and I don't think that you, when you were serving, would be clouding your judgment based on the political imperatives that you felt from your superiors. And I feel like that kind of comment is indicative of why it is so difficult for us to have a reasoned debate and a reasoned analysis of this issue. It is a critical national security issue. Now, looking at and assessing whether or not Guantanamo detainees or international terrorists inside the United States prisons or inside secure military facilities would present a risk to the United States, we don't have to speculate. We have the wisdom of experience. I think it would surprise everyone here in this room, everyone watching on TV, everyone following this debate to learn that it was a Republican president who first brought a Guantanamo detainee to the United States. Yasser Hamdi in 2002 was transferred first to Virginia and then to Charleston, the very subject of the first panel. It is unclear to me why that was not the same kind of incredible security risk that Governor Haley and the members of this committee seemed to indicate it was in the first panel when Yasser Hamdi was held in Charleston for 2 years. Not only was Yasser Hamdi held in Charleston, but Jose Padilla. This is the man that was accused of trying to detonate a radiological dirty bomb in the United States, as well as Ali Al-Mari. There were 3 detainees that were held in Charleston for almost the entirety of the Bush administration. There was no uproar about it at the time. There were no protestations from Governor Sanford to the Bush administration or to Congress that those detainees in Charleston represented the kind of security risk that we heard this morning. And the notion that in 2002, still in the shadow of the horrific attacks of 2001 that brought down the World Trade Center and attacked the Pentagon, that we faced somehow a lesser threat than we do now, I find very hard to believe. The notion, and the detainees in Charleston are not the only ones. We have at least 11 states in the District of Columbia since 9/11 have housed very high-ranking, senior, and extremely dangerous international terrorists in maximum security prisons or in secure prison facilities. It was alluded to in the ranking member's opening statement that just 15 miles from here, right now, the accused ringleader of the Benghazi attack is sitting in an Alexandria prison awaiting trial. He has been there for almost 2 years. There has been no protest. There has been no political controversy surrounding that particular aspect of the Benghazi attack. Yet the notion that bringing Guantanamo detainees into the United States in a very similar situation presents an unacceptable risk is hard for me to understand and hard for me to fathom. I will just close with one last comment about the implications for state and local officials. Certainly, there is emergency response planning that these officials have to deal with on a day-to-day basis for almost every eventuality. The notion that Pentagon officials, Defense Department officials, and the city and state of South Carolina have not prepared for the possibility that the Charleston Naval Base will have to be evacuated because of a hurricane strikes me as hard to believe, simply because there could be Guantanamo detainees there now, as there were Guantanamo detainees there for a number of years before, doesn't change the fact that they have already done these kinds of plans. And with that, I will conclude my opening statement, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Chair thanks the gentleman, and the chair now recognizes Mr. Thompson for his statement.
Chairman Perry, esteemed committee, I would like to first thank our veterans as well as those that have worked in Guantanamo Bay. I also would like to thank our law enforcement officers and particularly Representative Jenkins for giving me this opportunity to speak today. Today I speak on behalf of Leavenworth, and I thank you for that opportunity. I speak to the President's desire to close Guantanamo Bay Detention Facility and the impact it would have on communities, particularly Leavenworth. Today, I want to focus on the issues of concern. First, the lack of communication by the Department of Defense and the Obama administration. Second, I would like to talk about the security implications of Kansas City metro area to the detainees if they were transferred there. And third, I would like to talk about the implications to the mission of Fort Leavenworth. As county attorney, I am the chief law enforcement officer, and I'm tasked with prosecuting criminal offenses and protecting the safety and welfare of the community. It's always important to me to have as much information as possible in making any decision regarding community safety. The Department of Defense has done a site survey for Fort Leavenworth, but it has failed to share any of the information with any of the local officials. Without this information, my community has no way to prepare for the economic burden or the potential threats it may receive from housing any detainees from Guantanamo Bay. Fresh memories of the attacks of San Bernardino, Paris, and Brussels demand communities remain on guard for terroristic threats. If detainees were placed in Leavenworth, it would make our community a high priority target. In 1997, Mohammed Salama, a convicted perpetrator of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, was housed in Leavenworth Penitentiary. The prison became a terrorist target and received several letter bombs. Our own law enforcement, as well as national law enforcement, had to expend significant resources to respond to this threat. To build a new facility in Fort Leavenworth, it would cost $91 million and take 3 years, and that's a comparison from the previous facility that was built 10 years ago. One of the major issues that Paul Lewis, the Department of Defense Special Envoy for the closure of Guantanamo Bay, has said that any facility for housing the detainees would require adequate medical facilities. Fort Leavenworth does not have these such facilities. The closest facilities are the University of Kansas Medical Center, which is roughly 45 minutes away. Beyond the economic concerns, there would be significant safety concerns if the detainees needed to be transferred there for their care. Further, the current facilities have roadways that are less than a chip shot away from the fort's border. There is a railroad that carries hazardous materials only a few hundred yards away. If that was found necessary to shut down, that would cost our community $1 million of revenue a day. There's an airport within the vicinity of the facility shared by my community. That would be rendered useless if a no-fly zone were required, such as the one that Guantanamo Bay has now. The Missouri River is adjacent to Fort Leavenworth and could allow accessibility to the fort. If deemed necessary to fortify the fort's borders, land belonging to the families that surround that area who have owned it before Kansas was even a state would have to lose that land to eminent domain. Leavenworth County is currently home to over 75,000 residents. Because the Fort Leavenworth is there, the approximate 20,000 veterans residing in around Leavenworth community area, and many of those have served in Afghanistan and in Iraq. Some of them suffer from PTSD as well as serious injuries from their tours of service. Gold Star families live in that community, have loved ones buried near yards away from where the disciplinary barracks is, where beyond the economic concerns, does putting the detainees in Fort Leavenworth say to the veterans and those families, how would this affect these people psychologically? Finally, Fort Leavenworth has the Command and General Staff College. It is the premier college for the national and international officers. Generals Bradley and Powell, President Eisenhower were among the attendees. Our officers as well as international officers bring their families to our community, which is a significant economic benefit to the area. President Obama wants Guantanamo Bay closed in part because of the impact of our relationships with our allies. The placement of detainees in Fort Leavenworth may cause these families, or even the international officers themselves, to not attend the college. The impact of losing the relationships with these international officers could have a long-term effects on our foreign relations. Putting it frankly, and from a friend of mine, placing the detainees in Fort Leavenworth would be similar to building a prison on Harvard Yard. Mr. Chairman, I look forward to answering questions from you and the committee.
Chair thanks Mr. Thompson. The chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes of questioning. Sheriff Bouchard, can you just reiterate, I started writing it down, but I missed the unreimbursed cost regarding San Bernardino. I think you mentioned that. Can you recount that figure for us in the committee?
Yes, he had told us it was $350,000 right off the bat in unreimbursed overtime, and $19 million have been expended by the locals on the totality of the situation.
$350,000 overtime and $19 million in unexpected cost to the local government. And as I recall, you said unreimbursed cost, right? So yes, the federal government hasn't come back in after the fact and taken care of that bill. It's the local community that bears the burden of the costs associated with a terrorist attack that some in the room have said that all agencies are prepared to handle and deal with at any time. And we understand that law enforcement does every single thing it can, but we understand that we're all human, and they only have to be right one time, right? So everybody, I guess what we're saying is that every community has to be prepared for $350,000 in overtime minimum and potentially up to $19 million in cost due to some terrorist-related attack, whether there's a prison housing detainees in your community or not, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Good, First of all, I don't owe anybody an apology. I would ask you, have you ever taken the oath of office to wear the nation's uniform? Then how would you have any idea of the requirements foisted upon individuals that take that oath and things that are said? I will tell you that I have taken the oath, and every single officer that has taken the oath, every single officer, Mr. Good, understands what I was saying. And what I said was, ours is not to question why. We serve at the pleasure of the Commander-in-Chief, period, period. And we offer our opinions. However, once the Commander-in-Chief gives the order, our job is to salute and move out. And if you knew that, if you ever took the oath, if you ever wore the uniform, if you ever served, you would know that. Moving on. Mr. Good, I think I answered your statement, okay? Like I said, moving on. How often have you read the National Security Strategy or the National Military Strategy? Microphone, please.
Apologies. I have frequently read the National Security
Frequently.
Strategy.
What's frequently?
Many times. It's part of my job.
It's part of your job. Many times, because it's an evolving document that changes administration by administration. Do you update yourself? You know that the strategy isn't always updated to concur with current events and evolving events, right?
I believe the National Security Strategy has been updated 2 times in this administration.
Right, and you've read both, apparently,
Yes.
right? And the National Military Strategy as well?
The QDDR, is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. What background do you have? What professional background do you have, other than working at this center for 13 years now? What professional background, training, et cetera, do you have in law enforcement, in the military, in national strategic studies, what have you? What background do you have other than working at this location?
I have been a professional in the national security policy space for more than 15 years. I have
But what does
served in
that
the
mean
military.
as a professional? What does that mean? You work there, but what training do you have?
I have been following these issues, and I'm deeply involved in them. But
Many of Americans have as well, but they don't come before Congress and testify with their opinions based on they've been following these issues for years. Many Americans are very concerned, but I'm asking, do you have any law enforcement training?
no,
Military training?
no.
Diplomatic training?
I don't know what that is, but no, probably.
Okay, well, there's a diplomatic corps, and they receive training. I mean, I'm just asking.
I've not
because-
served in the government, if that's what you're asking me.
Right, so you're elucidating your opinions on these subjects, but I remind you, and I'm looking at your own testimony here, that you say, for these reasons, a long bipartisan list of senior government and national security figures do not believe Guantanamo advances U.S. national security interests. Well, I can tell you there's just a whole lot of people that serve in this place that have worn the uniform, who have training, whether in law enforcement, whether in national security, whether in the diplomatic corps, that disagree. So with all due respect, while I appreciate your opinion, and many of us do, and we asked you here for your alternative opinion, it is your opinion. And quite honestly, I'm not sure it's an informed opinion, but it's an opinion, and we appreciate that. Let me ask you this. I spoke with some folks recently in a hearing of similar subject, Special Envoy for Guantanamo closure and the Defense Special Envoy for Guantanamo detention closure. Both of those individuals cited numerous things like you do about it's a magnet for recruiting, and Guantanamo is, and that it hurts our national security. It costs us a lot of money to have it there. And I ask, what empirical data do you have to support that? And what empirical data do you have to support the claim that moving these individuals to South Carolina, to Kansas, or anywhere in continental United States will have any difference, will make any difference? And these individuals could provide me no empirical data or studies on cost or otherwise. Can you provide any at this time?
There was one of the most famous cases during the Bush administration. There was an interrogator, a military interrogator from Iraq, who reported that at the time, the #1 recruitment tool that al-Qaeda in Iraq was using to draw individuals into their ranks was the existence of Guantanamo Bay And it was clear and it was persuasive, and it persuaded not people just like me, but people like Colin Powell, people like Jim Baker, people like the President of the United States, George W. Bush, John McCain. Now, you can impugn my credentials all you want, but I think you'll have a harder time impugning their credentials.
I'm in the business of questioning everything, including my party, because it is national security. And national security, sir, comes before everything. And with all due respect, I'm not necessarily interested so much in the opinions of a terrorist. And not only a terrorist, but only one terrorist. And oh, by the way, I don't understand, and nor have you told me how it makes a difference whether it's in Guantanamo or South Carolina. What is can you tell me that? Is there a difference?
Guantanamo is a symbol of the torture and abuse that occurred during the Bush administration at that prison and at other prisons. Now, it is not simply associated with propaganda against Guantanamo. It's not simply associated with the fact that there are military detainees there. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There was no propaganda associated with the Charleston Naval Brig when Yasser Hamdi was there.
So when we move all these prisoners to South Carolina and then the propaganda moves to South Carolina, I guess that would then justify and validate the governor's concerns.
Well, I don't know that there's any evidence that the propaganda would.
Do you have any evidence to the contrary?
Yes, there was no propaganda associated with the Charleston Naval
Were
Brig.
all the detainees in Charleston, South Carolina?
There were three detainees.
Three, but I'm talking about all of them, all in one location, all the focus of international terrorism and Islamists such as they are in Guantanamo.
I understand that it's your opinion that that would follow, but
do you
I'm talking
it's
about
not my
the
opinion. I'm asking if you have any evidence.
there's no
Thank
evidence.
You.
There's no evidence.
At this point, I yield to the gentleman, Mr. Richard.
Based on history, because you can only use history to predict the future. Based on history, when South Carolina contained and held 3, was any propaganda targeted at South Carolina, Charleston?
No.
Thank you. Now, Sheriff, you mentioned in your testimony, and I'm just trying to relate all this together, that the lack of military equipment, the 1033 program, causes some concern for housing detainees?
It causes concern relative to the preparedness level and the understanding of the threat and the situations we deal with on a daily basis. That causes us great concern because we believe a lot of the decisions made by the administration, be it 1033 or otherwise, is focused on perception, not reality.
So you think it was perception that some of our police forces were being militarized and that they were using armored vehicles running through urban neighborhoods?
I'm saying that the perception that's been fostered that a armored vehicle makes us militarized in essence is wrong. That an armored vehicle that pulls up at a bank or a grocery store every day to protect money, when that bank or grocery store is being held up and a police vehicle shows up with the same armored vehicle, somehow it's scary or militarized, is false. It's there for the same reason, to protect people.
I understand, but we had tanks going through urban neighborhoods.
We have no tanks, sir. There are no tanks in police inventory in America. There's only armored vehicles with no weaponized. That's one of the false perceptions. There is no tank in police custody in America. Armored personnel carriers, big, safe boxes without weapons, sir.
Well, we're just going to agree to disagree on that. And as my sheriffs and police advocate for things, I think that one of the things, especially in the petrochemical industry, that's one of the things that my sheriffs asked for. So, but I'm just trying to figure out how we made that connection. You also say that there's a high recidivism rate with Guantanamo prisoners. What is the recidivism rate? I mean, who was released and how often do they recommit a crime?
There's been a number of studies. The most recent one that I read, there was a 30% recidivism of Guantanamo detainees returning to the battlefield.
Can I jump in on that one?
You sure, but what's the recidivism rate at the largest prison in under your jurisdiction?
Depends on the crime, but there's a fundamental difference, and I'd like to answer.
But wait. Let me ask a question.
Okay.
Because I was a state rep, I was over the Judiciary Committee, and everybody knows the general recidivism rate of their prisons. So what is your general recidivism rate?
Well, first of all, sheriffs don't run the state prison, so I can't quote you the recidivism rate. But my point that I wish to
You run a local one. Wouldn't you run a local one? A local jail?
I do run, in fact, a jail. It
Okay.
depends on the crime, but typically it runs from 30 to 60, maybe 70%, depending
Okay.
on the crime.
Mr. Gould, you wanted to interject something?
Yes, these figures, I think, must be properly assessed by breaking them down between the detainees that were released from Guantanamo during the Bush administration and the detainees that were released from Guantanamo under the Obama administration. And the reason why that is because the Obama administration implemented a substantial process for determining whether or not it was appropriate to release the detainees. Now, any individual detainee. Now, in order to be released, it needs the unanimous decision of 6 senior national security officials, and then it also further requires the Secretary of Defense to certify that an individual, the security arrangements associated with the individual's transfer help keep the Americans safe. And what we've learned is that this process has worked. 94% of the detainees who have been either confirmed or suspected of rejoining the fight were released during the Bush administration. A tiny number of the detainees that have been accused of or confirmed of rejoining the fight were released under the Obama administration.
Mr. Thompson, let me, and look, this is a very difficult subject, and I understand being an elected official, and I think all of the witnesses on the Republican side are elected, and with elected becomes a different responsibility. But let me ask you a question. Would you just be in favor of closing the Bureau of Prisons facility we have at Leavenworth now?
No, I would not be in favor of closing the facility. That has undue revenue for our economy. And, but I can say, in talking to officials and retired officials from Fort Leavenworth, the detainees coming to Guantanamo Bay, detainees coming from Guantanamo Bay would cause a very serious concern. Those are much different than the detainees we already house at Fort Leavenworth.
Right, because it's more minimum, well, I guess middle or minimum security?
Correct.
So you're okay with the economic development and the jobs that are created by housing minimum, but you just don't want to go to maximum or a few detainees or several detainees from Guantanamo?
Well, I'm Leavenworth.
I mean,
You know, we know prisons.
in Leavenworth.
I mean, we're known for prisons. We're known for being able to hold and house prisoners.
Exactly.
But these prisoners are much different than any of the others that we've seen or have seen. They're 80 of the worst that we know of. There's a specific reason why they're at Guantanamo Bay, and we would not want them in Fort Leavenworth or Leavenworth for the effects it would have on our community and on our citizens. Not even the economic concern, well, including the economic concerns, but primarily the psychological concerns it would have to all our veterans, our Gold Star family members, and anyone else out there. If I could also address Mr. Goode, who's talking about the symbolism of Guantanamo Bay and the reason for its closure. That symbolism was something that President Obama has used for the example why it should be closed. But that is not going to dissipate with it being closed. That is going to stay with it. We don't forget about 9/11, even though the structures are now built over where they have fallen. We're going to continue to have that burden, and we're going to have to worry about that threat. I would also reiterate that Mr. Goode's own statements or written statements in January 2016 said that symbolism is fading.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair now recognizes Mr. Duncan from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Goode, what year was the 9/11 attacks on New York?
That was 2001.
You were talking about Charleston Navy brig holding detainees, terrorists. What year was that?
2002 through 2009.
Okay, thank you. What year was the Department of Homeland Security stood up?
2002?
Three. What year was this committee formed?
2004.
Okay, so what I'm showing is this has been a fluid process. We were attacked. We had to begin prosecuting a war against those that attacked us. When we captured enemy combatants on the battlefield, we had to figure out what to do with them, correct?
Yes.
So, and the Homeland had to figure out how we're going to respond to terrorism attacks on our soil. We combined 22 agencies. We created a brand new committee within the halls of Congress to continually talk about security of the homeland. Hence, we've got this hearing talking about security of the homeland. For your information, the recidivism rate, or the number of detainees that return to the battlefield, is about 30%. It doesn't matter whether they were released by the Bush administration or the Obama administration. How many terrorists shot up the Chattanooga recruitment station?
I believe it was one.
One. It only takes one to kill a large number of Americans somewhere in the world, whether that's U.S. soil or somewhere else. Whether they're released by Bush or released by Obama, it only takes one to commit heinous acts of terror against Americans. So we know that the DOD study said about 30% of those released, regardless of who released them, have returned to the battlefield. And I would argue that American lives have been lost because of them returning to the battlefield. So your argument that Bush released more and more return to the battlefield just doesn't hold water, because it only takes one of the terrorists to do that. Mr. Thompson.
Yes, sir.
You heard Governor Haley talk about DOD doing a site assessment at Charleston Naval Brig, and we know that in August they did a site assessment there at Fort Leavenworth. What kind of communication have they had with you?
Representative Duncan, they've had no conversation with myself, and they've had no or little conversation with any of our city, local, or law enforcement or any officials. Everything that
Nor state officials, based on the governor's testimony, because she and Governor Brownback had sent a letter asking, right?
Correct. There has been no communication. We have no idea. There's 80 detainees that potentially could be coming. We don't know who of those 80 are coming. There's 26 that are set for release but cannot be released because they don't have a home country. There's 44 that cannot be released at all, and then there's the 10 or 7 that are being prosecuted and 3 have been convicted. Are we getting the 7? Are we getting the 3? Are we getting the 44? Are we getting the 26? We don't know. How can we even feasibly understand what type of threats any one of those people could bring to our community, and what we would have to do to strengthen our border around Fort Leavenworth, increase our law enforcement costs, increase our safety? We have no idea, because we're not being talked to, and that's one of the things I would want, and I would want for our community, or any community that would look at having these detainees.
Exactly. Have any of you gentlemen visited the prison at Guantanamo Bay?
No.
No.
No. Mr. Thompson, I have. You heard the chairman say he just recently did. I think you've been down there more than once. In 2001, 2002, when we started catching enemy combatants, they took them to Guantanamo Bay. You see a lot of pictures. Time Life, or Time Magazine, loves to show a picture of these outdoor facilities of people cooking and detainees being in a fenced-in area. But since 2002, we've built some pretty substantial prisons, facilities there. There's a medium security, there's a low security area. I don't think there's any prisoners in the low security area anymore. There's medium security, and there's a maximum security. Medium security is probably like the prison in your county. Community rooms, cell blocks off of those. They have the ability to cook their own food, do their own laundry, participate in crafts. They're still incarcerated, but it's much like what you see in counties and state facilities. Then there's a maximum security facility. These prisoners, these terrorists held in the maximum security, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, has no contact with any other prisoner. He has his own room, a cell. He's monitored 24/7, 365 by the security team that can watch his every movement while he's in that cell. They're Muslim. They have to have the ability to pray. There are compound areas outside of their cell where they can go out, get some fresh air, connected to their cell, not a community area for exercise. So they can go there. They don't have any contact with any other prisoner. There are some special circumstances holding Muslim terrorists that want to harm America, and a special prison facility has been built on Guantanamo Bay just for that purpose. In addition, there's a courtroom facility built at Guantanamo Bay at taxpayer expense for trying convicted terrorists, or captured terrorists rather, at Guantanamo Bay. So they have access, secure access, to counsel with their legal counsel, so that they can't escape the courtroom. All this is in place. If they came to the Naval Brig in Charleston or to Fort Leavenworth, I do believe that it's going to cost the taxpayer additional resources to create or recreate what we already have at Guantanamo Bay to house these very special prisoners. Are you set up the same way Guantanamo Bay is based on my description of those cell blocks?
We are not set up for that. Like I said, at this time, we would have to build a new facility. That new facility would take at least 3 years. And I'm using a comparison from what Fort Leavenworth had told me what it took to build their most recent facility, and that was 10 years ago. So that funds of $91 million might be up to 120 million.
Mr. Thompson, is DOD coming up with these plans right now? Because they're not having conversations
No.
with you about what your needs are. So are they doing this unilaterally, figuring out, well, we're going to go to Fort Leavenworth and we're going to build a brand new prison. This is what it's going to look like. These are facilities it's going to have. Wouldn't they talk to you? Because you've got to run the doggone place.
Well, you know, I have no clearance to be able to talk to the Fort or the military officials on official duty, so I have no idea what they're discussing. I can tell you that I've looked at the map of Fort Leavenworth and I've been told where the idea would be. There's a Boy Scout and Girl Scout camp in the center. There's no water, there's no electricity area to connect to that area, much less having to build it. There is not the facility or capabilities to be able to house them at this time. I'm also told that the Guantanamo Bay detainees are generally, especially if they're maximum, have to have almost specialized security for one in, one out, watching over them.
So if we've got to build all these new facilities, why are we looking at existing facilities? Why don't we go down to Louisiana and go out into the high ground in the bayou and build a brand new facility? Why not go to Fort A.P. Hill right down the road here, thousands upon thousands of undeveloped acres, and drop a prison facility there? Why aren't we talking about Fort Leavenworth or Charleston if we're talking about this?
Well, I would say
it's interesting when you bring that closer to home, I do believe.
Well, I would say that if they were, I mean, in Guantanamo Bay, they are away from harming any other citizens, and that's one of the most serious concerns that we have about bringing them to the United States soil. And if to bring them into a community such as Governor Haley's Charleston, or bringing them to something like Fort Leavenworth, where there are communities of veterans as well as just citizens like myself living there, that's going to cause them undue threat, concern, economic impact, social impact, psychological impact, all these things just by moving them here.
Absolutely.
The gentleman's time has long expired. The gentleman now recognizes the ranking member.
I'd just like to add that there is no high ground in the bayou. It's all water.
That's a
I've
good
been
point.
to some high ground in the bayou, so anyway, thank you for that.
All right. The chair thanks the witnesses for their very valuable testimony and for being here today, and the members for their questions. Members may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we ask you to respond to these in writing. Pursuant to the committee rule 7E, the hearing record will remain open for 10 days. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.